investment of $402 million to build the International Convention Centre, and it takes them 35 years to get effectively the benefit out of that from their perspective. And of course governments can change and they can make a call as to whether they want to do in the future, and so obviously the compensation clause would effectively compensate the company for any changes that occur. So perhaps any questions from them?
Do you know on that compensation, I mean, what's the legal, I mean, some people have suggested it might be unconstitutional.
Yeah, I heard the Greens say that, yes.
Well, a couple of lawyers too.
Well, I don't think that's correct. The governments enter into agreements all the time with organisations. And of course, Parliament has the sovereign ability to change arrangements at any stage. And of course, Parliaments do come and go, and new Parliaments come and have a different view. But it'd be similar, for example, if there was an arrangement to build, I don't know, let's pick a random central city rail loop in Auckland, and then halfway through the construction that would take later than 3 years, the government came in and said, oh, by the way, you're the contractor, but you can disappear because we don't like you, and no, you won't be getting any compensation, thanks very much. And if governments took that approach, then ultimately, very quickly, the whole place would grind to a halt because nobody would want to set up any sort of contract with the government.
Does that mean these compensation agreements are now part of all public-private partnership type things?
Well, there is always, in various arrangements that the government does, so for example, the Wiri prison, obviously there's certain arrangements that if they change, then obviously there'd be some form of work out for the arrangement for the partner. And this is just exactly the same thing. For the Greens to suggest that this is somehow uncharted territory is, the other ones are uncharted territory.
But it's happening more now, isn't it? And isn't it a way of tying the hands of a future government?
Not at all, because any government and Parliament can make its own decisions. But it's only fair that an organisation they're contracting with that goes across a period of time, in this case 35 years, if the contract is changed because of the will of Parliament, there's some form of compensation for doing that.
What happens if the construction and fit out goes over the $315 million budget? Who pays for it, Skycity or the government?
Well, all the advice I've had at this point is it's going to comfortably fit within that $315 million. But certainly the agreement, as you've seen today, is limited to that in terms of Skycity's contribution, and that's on the basis of the arrangements that we've come to, which Court of Mentor has said is fair to both parties. If it was to go on, we'd have to talk about it, Simon, and work out who was going to pay any extra, but certainly we're not anticipating that would occur.
But so the government could pay that?
Well, that's one possibility. One other possibility would be changing a few of the concessions, but literally there's no intention to go beyond the 315.
Did the government...
Ray said today that if the Greens got into government, they would try and legislate over this, essentially test that compensation clause. How watertight is it? Would they be able to do that?
Well, the contractual arrangements will be written up in the contract. It won't be in the legislation. I mean, ultimately, any Parliament can legislate over anything, but you'd have to be pretty careful because fundamentally governments wouldn't run. I just think the Greens are back on another planet in this space. I mean, they obviously object to elected governments making decisions, particularly if they're not part of them, but that's fair enough.
Is there a quid pro quo under what circumstances can the government seek some sort of compensation for Skycity?
Yes, there is. There's a number of protections in there in terms of that, particularly the ability for the government to effectively appoint another operator of the convention centre if they're not happy with the performance. The ability for the government under certain circumstances to resume control over the convention centre, and the ability also for the government to purchase the balance, if you like, of the concession to some point of what's required. And they're set out in the execution.
Are there any conditions though around, say, problem gambling, if that proves to be a bigger issue at the casino with the greater number of tables, etc.?
Well, I think that's a really important point actually, because there's nothing in this agreement that contracts away from the ability of government to impose requirements from time to time in terms of problem gambling. For example, this problem gambling levy, which is not affected in any way by this agreement, and that's set by regulation, and Skycity has to pay that. And if that goes up, they have to pay more, and there's no compensation for anything like that. Similarly, if a future government said, okay, we've got some new technology for problem gaming that we want to introduce, it's completely able to do that. And the obvious one that's mentioned occasionally from time to time is facial recognition. My understanding is that's not quite a technology which is able to be usefully used yet at this point. But should it become so at some point, then a government can introduce that, and again, that doesn't affect this particular agreement. The things that which Skycity would get compensation on, should that be required, are very clearly laid out in the heads of agreement and will be transferred through to the final agreement.
Have you got
And those are the things in relation to the concessions that they have received in return for building the convention centre.
Have you got parliamentary support for this to get it through? Did you have to do any deals with Peter Dunn, for example, to get support?
We have briefed Peter Dunn fully and also John Banks, and they're both supportive.
Do you think the fact that Skycity wants this compensation clause negotiated in shows that business is afraid of a Labour Greens government coming in and legislating away their profits?
I think what they are concerned about, it's fair to say that their focus on this has grown in recent weeks in light of some other sort of proposed massive changes that Labour and the Greens would propose. It's not to say they think it would necessarily happen in the short term, but over a 35-year period, they probably figure that there's the potential for a government change at some point. And at that point, given the propensity of Labour and the Greens in recent times to do some pretty desperate economic suggestions, then they probably are concerned that could happen at some point.
Just going back to Peter Dunn, did he ask for any changes? Did he have any concerns about the look of the legislation?
No, I took him through it. He hasn't seen the legislation. The legislation will simply give effect to the agreement.
But in terms of the deal?
In terms of the arrangements, no, we went through it in some detail with him and he was happy with it.
Did the government consider doing a all of government cost benefit analysis of this deal, taking into account the effects on justice and health of problem gambling?
Cabinet looked pretty closely at those issues. There was some, and you'll see in due course in terms of the Cabinet paper, there was the Department of Internal Affairs had some comment and observation in terms of the arrangements, and the Cabinet weighed it up and decided this was the best approach to take. Again, I would point out that the number of pokie machines that we're talking about here is less than 6 months of the deduction that's occurring naturally anyway in this country. So it's currently, on average, over the last 4 years, there's been 550 machines a year less at the end of each year, and we're talking about here 230 machines. So if anything, it only slows down the rate of decline for a short period of time.
So what did those cabinet papers say about the likely cost of that on the health and justice system from problem gambling?
Well, they didn't monetise that, and as you think about it, it's not possible to monetise because you have to make an assumption about what an individual additional machine would have an impact in terms of those issues. And I think you can reasonably make an argument that the minority of people that have issues in problem gambling, it's not the number of machines, it's access to any machines. You could make that argument. The fact of the matter is the vast majority of people that participate in this sort of gaming and also lotteries and so on have no issue with it, but there are people that have issues, and that's why we have the problem gambling levy, and that's why we have the protections that we have in the system to pick these people up.
Was there any net fiscal impact assessment made? Not really, you're just assuming that over there, but thank you.
Sorry, what was that?
Was any net fiscal impact analysis done, or are you just assuming that by having a convention centre it must be net?
Well, it's a net zero from the Crown's perspective in a fiscal sense. So our assumption is on the basis that the Cabinet's made a judgment in terms of the concessions versus the opportunity. And interestingly, we've probably made a similar assessment to what occurred back in 2001, which was also 230 machines, interestingly enough, coincidentally. And there was a convention centre built which was for 815 delegates. This convention centre is for 3,500 delegates. It's a considerably larger facility, and I think on balance we think we've probably struck a considerably better deal than was struck by the previous Labor government, or under the previous Labor government in 2001.
Did Skycity accept a smaller number of pokies than they would have otherwise in return for this greater regulatory certainty?
No, I think it's fair to say they had a number of things that they wanted, and we had a number of things we were prepared to consider, and then we had people negotiate, and we're both reasonably happy with the outcome.
The negotiations took a very long time.
That's correct.
Is there any comment you can make on that?
No, not really. Obviously, there were other matters as the thing proceeded, which which had an impact on the timeline, but at the end of the day, it was done as quickly as it reasonably could be, given those other issues.
It wasn't because there was a big disagreement between the two parties.
No,
Was
you couldn't characterise that at all. No.
Were there any sticking points?
Oh, I'm sure there was. Yes, it was a robust negotiation. Obviously, a bit more robust than the earlier one.
The Court of Mentor report is going to play a pretty central role in the way this thing works. And that report's been prepared with numbers provided by Skycity. Is there any way that you're going to get any independent verification of those numbers, or are you just going to accept Skycity's word on this?
Well, it was also measured against some of the public company comparators, which they go through in their report. There is a important clause in the heads of agreement that Sky verifies the information that it's being supplied is accurate, and obviously that would bring the agreement into concern. And in fact, that is one of the conditions of the agreement. And also, although Court of Mentor put those effectively comments on in terms of their own views, they had to have access to a range of publicly available information about the returns of these machines. And of course, they have Sky's own, it's a publicly listed company, it has its own information that they can cross-check against the information supply.
The building will have to start after the law is passed, obviously, so you expect to introduce it soon and pass the legislation before
Yeah,
the middle.
the process from here is to complete the final agreement. We put a reasonably heroic date on it to incentivise the lawyers to get through as quickly as we possibly can. And we'll put a month on that. We might run an extra couple of weeks by agreement, we'll just have to see. Then the intention would be introduce legislation after that. Take your time.